Welcome to Auto News Talk. I'm so glad you're here because, well, I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine pulling into a parking space in your massive, 5,000-pound SUV.
Oh, yeah.
Right. You shift into park, you hear that, that familiar click.
Just a totally normal routine.
Exactly. You unbuckle your seatbelt, maybe you turn around to get your kids out of the back seat, and suddenly, without any warning at all, the entire vehicle just starts rolling away.
It is genuinely the ultimate nightmare scenario for a driver.
It really is. No driver in control, no warning lights, just raw momentum taking over.
Yeah, it's a complete and profound breach of trust between human and machine.
And that scenario kind of sets up exactly what we are exploring. Because usually when you picture the automotive industry, you imagine something highly predictable, right?
Right, like assembly lines, steel being stamped, cause and effect.
Yes, exactly. You build a solid truck, people buy it. Yeah. But when you really look at the research we've pulled together, when you lift the hood on what is actually happening in the automotive sector, that illusion of control just completely shatters.
It does. We are looking at an industry that is quite literally losing its grip.
Yeah, between labyrinth-like trade policies, wildly unpredictable consumer wallets, and vehicles that have just become rolling supercomputers, automakers are navigating this brutal obstacle course.
The terrain we're walking through is incredibly volatile. I mean, if we want to understand why certain vehicles are on the road, why some cost an absolute fortune, and why others are rolling out of parking spaces on their own, we have to map out the entire life cycle.
Right.
We are tracking a vehicle from the international laws that govern its raw materials, right down to the dealership lot, and finally into the driveway where the physical mechanics are tested.
It honestly feels like a giant Jenga tower. You pull out one block in manufacturing policy over in a government building, and suddenly a sales structure on a local dealership lot starts to wobble.
That is a great analogy.
So let's start at the very foundation of that tower, which is international trade rules. And I'll be honest, I hear the phrase trade agreement, and my eyes immediately glaze over.
Most people's do, yeah.
Does a policy change in a boardroom really impact you, the average person buying a car?
Oh, it impacts every single dollar on the sticker price. One policy analysis we are looking at issues a pretty severe warning about the impending review of the United States, Mexico, and Canada trade agreement.
The USMCA.
Exactly. So historically, the auto industry relied on a guaranteed 16-year extension for this pact.
Which is a massive chunk of time.
Right. It provided a stable horizon to plan these massive multi-billion-dollar factory investments. But that long-term stability is gone.
Wow.
The analysis points out that the pact is shifting to a highly unpredictable annual review process.
Wait, an annual review? For an industry that takes, half a decade just to design a car and tool up a factory? That sounds like absolute poison for long-term planning.
It paralyzes investment. I mean, remember, in North American vehicle production, components often cross national borders multiple times before final assembly.
Oh, right.
An engine block might be cast in one country, machined in another, and then installed in a third. But the policy analysis highlights a proposed rule change that would fundamentally upend that integration.
What's the change?
There is a specific push to raise the regional content requirement to an astonishing 82%.
82%? That's huge.
And it gets stricter. Within that threshold, 50% of the vehicle's total value would be required to be produced specifically within the United States.
Wait, tracking U.S. content separately from Mexican or Canadian content sounds like trying to unbake a cake.
It really does.
How does an automaker even do that? Do they have to audit every single microchip, wiring, harness, and bolt just to prove exactly which side of an arbitrary line it was manufactured on?
That is the exact administrative nightmare the industry is bracing for. Tracking origin at that granular level adds a colossal layer of overhead.
I can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, vehicles contain thousands of individual parts, often sourced from dozens of countries around the globe. To rapidly restructure a supply chain of that magnitude and then implement the accounting software just to prove compliance to customs agents is wildly expensive.
Which makes me wonder about the unintended consequences here. If you make the compliance rules that impossibly strict and the financial burden that overwhelming, do car companies even bother trying to comply?
That is the exact trap the analysis warns about.
Really? Why not just accept the penalty?
Exactly. If the cost of completely untangling and rebuilding these deeply integrated supply chains exceeds the cost of the trade penalties, automakers will simply choose to pay the tariffs.
Right.
They will just write it off as the cost of doing business. And if they do that, the policy completely defeats its own intent of increasing domestic production.
Because the government wants factories built here, but they might just end up collecting tariff checks while the vehicles continue to be built elsewhere.
Spot on.
That feels like a massive blind spot in the legislative process.
Mm-hmm.
And, there is another glaring limitation here that I noticed.
That's that.
Well, what this policy analysis doesn't answer is whether the U.S. actually possesses the physical capacity or the raw materials to process all of these components domestically.
Right.
Even if the automakers desperately wanted to comply. You can pass a law demanding that half a car's value comes from one specific place. But if the lithium mines or the steel mills simply do not exist there, the entire mathematical equation breaks down.
The physical infrastructure has to match the legislative ambition. And this is where the theoretical policy bleeds directly into the practical reality of the consumer.
Because it all trickles down.
Exactly. If automakers are forced to spend billions untangling supply chains or paying heavy tariffs, those costs get passed directly onto the sticker price.
And when you look at the sales data, you can clearly see consumers hitting a massive wall on affordability.
Oh, absolutely.
We are looking at a market report focused on General Motors' U.S. volume, and the numbers show a really definitive slip. We see a 4.2% decline in overall volume in a single financial quarter.
Yeah, that's significant.
And when you break it down by the specific brands, it's pretty rough. Cadillac took a 19.2% hit.
Ouch.
Buick dropped 7.5%. And Chevy fell 3.9%.
And those numbers are particularly troubling because they occurred in a broader market that financial analysts projected to be relatively flat. It represents a genuine loss of momentum.
Right.
But to understand the mechanics of that drop, we have to look at the specific propulsion systems buyers are choosing, or, well, the ones they are actively rejecting.
And this is where the data gets genuinely shocking to me. Overall, electric vehicle sales for the automaker plunged a massive 33%.
A 33% drop.
Yeah, and if you zoom in on their highly publicized electric Silverado truck, demand weakened so significantly that it dropped 25.9%.
Mm-hmm. That is a staggering retreat, especially when you consider the sheer amount of capital these legacy automakers are pouring into expanding their electric lineups.
The infrastructure and the marketing are pushing one direction, but the consumer's just pulling the other way.
Exactly. Though what that first sales report doesn't answer is whether this 33% drop in new EVs is a permanent rejection of the technology by consumers or just a temporary pause because of the economy.
That's a great point. And we actually have a complimentary market report covering that exact same sales period that provides a fascinating counterweight.
It wasn't uniformly bad news across the board.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah.
In stark contrast to the EV struggles, traditional gas-powered SUVs experienced record momentum.
Yeah, the side-by-side comparison is wild to see. While the electric trucks gathered dust, the gas-powered GMC Terrain was up 29%.
Wow.
And the Chevrolet Traverse climbed 26%. People are clearly still buying large vehicles. They are just overwhelmingly choosing traditional internal combustion engines.
But that same source notes another factor impacting that overall 4.2% volume slip, and it has to do with discontinued models.
Right, the older cars.
Yeah, the loss of discontinued vehicles cost the automaker more than 12,000 sales compared to the previous reporting period.
Which happens a lot. Automakers frequently discontinue older, more affordable entry-level models to retool their factories for these massive new EV pushes.
They are clearing out the old lines to make way for the future.
Precisely. But by killing off those affordable gas cars, they leave a huge gap in their lineup. Buyers walk onto the lot looking for a reasonably priced commuter car, realize it no longer exists, and absolutely balk at the price tag of the new electric replacement.
So the legacy automakers are essentially caught in a trap of their own making.
They really are. They're dangerously dependent on selling traditional gas-powered trucks and SUVs to generate the massive profits required to fund their EV expansions.
They're using the past to subsidize a future that consumers are actively resisting.
It's a very precarious balancing act. What that second report focusing on the SUVs doesn't answer is exactly which specific discontinued models accounted for that 12,000 vehicle gap.
Right. It leaves a blind spot. Are buyers missing cheap sedans?
Mm-hmm.
Small utility vehicles. We only know they left the lot empty-handed.
Exactly.
I want to circle back to that staggering 33% plunge in new EV sales, though. If new EVs are tanking that hard, does that mean consumers are just entirely rejecting the concept of electric vehicles? Like, Have they decided the tech just doesn't work for their lifestyle?
You would naturally assume that, but data from Cox Automotive pushes back on that assumption entirely.
Oh, really?
Yeah, their analysis of the broader market reveals that while new EV sales slid, particularly after the loss of federal tax rebates, the used electric vehicle market is absolutely exploding.
Exploding.
The volume there is incredible. 128,000 used EVs were sold in a single quarter, marking a 29% increase.
Wow, 29% increase. So consumers do actually want the electric experience.
They absolutely desire the product, but the underlying mechanics of affordability dictate their reality. The Cox Automotive data points out that the average used EV transaction price settled around $37,000.
$37,000.
That specific price point is the mechanism unlocking the demand.
Let's think about why 37 grand is the magic number here. I mean, a new EV can easily run $60, $70, or $80,000.
Easily.
That is early adopter, luxury buyer territory. But $37,000, that is the price of a standard, heavily equipped used gas car.
Yes, it brings electric driving down to parity with the average American car buyer's budget.
And the supply side of this equation is just as fascinating, right?
It is a perfect storm. Years ago, aggressive federal tax loopholes heavily incentivized leasing electric vehicles rather than buying them outright.
Oh, the lease loops.
Right. Fast forward to the end of those contract terms, and expiring leases are returning a massive flood of supply back to dealer lots.
So you combine that surging inventory with, volatile gasoline prices, motivating buyers to seek alternatives, and the result is massive secondhand demand.
Precisely. The market found its equilibrium in the used lot, because the initial sticker price on a brand new one, stripped of any tax rebate assistance, is simply a bridge too far for the average wallet.
But there is a lingering shadow hanging over this secondhand surge, right? Driven by depreciation and technological uncertainty.
The battery anxiety.
Exactly. What this Cox Automotive data doesn't answer is how long-term anxiety over battery degradation and rapidly changing charging technology will impact these second owners when it is time for them to sell.
That is the great unknown. When that $37,000 used EV becomes a third-hand vehicle, what is its actual residual value?
Right. Does a decade-old battery hold enough charge to make the car worth anything at all? That unknown variable affects buyers, dealers, and the banks financing the loans.
It is a ticking clock for that entire segment of the market.
Now, we have discussed international trade policies shaping production costs. We have tracked shifting consumer habits and the deep economics of used versus new EVs.
We have covered a lot of ground.
But we have to remember what we're actually dealing with. We aren't just talking about lines on a spreadsheet.
No.
These are giant physical machines. They weigh thousands of pounds, they travel at highway speeds, and sometimes the basic underlying mechanical engineering simply fails.
Which brings us to the final and arguably most critical piece of the automotive life cycle: physical vulnerability and safety.
Another source we pulled zeros in on a terrifying and mechanical reality. Ford Motor Company and Lincoln dealers are managing a massive service campaign.
Huge.
This recall affects over 741,000 vehicles.
That scale is immense.
We're talking about specific model generations of highly popular family haulers and work trucks. Ford Expeditions, Lincoln Navigators, Ford Explorers, Lincoln Aviators, and F-150 pickups.
And the nature of the defect strikes at the most fundamental expectation a driver possesses. When you put a heavy vehicle in park, it should remain entirely stationary.
Let's break down the actual mechanics of what is failing here, because it is chilling. The recall documents outline a flaw involving the parking pawl.
Right.
For those who aren't mechanics, the parking pawl is basically like sticking a thick metal crowbar into the spokes of a bicycle wheel to physically stop it from turning.
A very apt description.
According to the source, a valve body separator plate inside the transmission restricts the flow of hydraulic fluid to the park valve. This restriction can cause that metal parking pole to engage briefly while the vehicle is actually still moving down the road.
Imagine shoving that crowbar into the bicycle spokes while you are pedaling at full speed.
It's violent.
It is. The unintended engagement violently damages the entire internal parking mechanism. But the terrifying part is the delayed consequence.
Because you might not know what happened.
Exactly. Once that internal system is damaged, it may not hold the vehicle properly the next time you actually intend to shift into park, leading directly to the risk of an unintended rollaway.
I want to highlight the human element detailed in the source because it paints a really vivid picture of the real-world impact. The automaker informed federal regulators they were aware of 24 allegations of property damage and 9 alleged injuries linked to this exact condition.
And there's a very specific detail there.
Yes, what stands out the most is that 2 of those injuries were specifically documented as emotional injuries.
That specific documentation is incredibly telling regarding the psychological impact of vehicle failure.
But, I mean, think about the sheer panic. You put your vehicle in park, you step out, and the machine simply decides to leave without you.
The utter helplessness of watching a 2.5-ton piece of metal roll away is immense. It is a profound loss of control.
And the prescribed remedy for this mechanical defect proves just how complex modern automotive engineering has become.
Oh, absolutely. The fix is not just draining the fluid or swapping out a broken metal gear.
Right.
It requires service technicians to plug in and update the vehicle's powertrain control module software.
A digital software patch to fix a mechanical hydraulic fluid problem. It really is a computer on wheels.
They do also have to physically inspect the parking system and replace parts if the internal damage has already occurred, but the root preventative measure is code.
That's wild.
It demonstrates how deeply intertwined digital software and physical mechanics are in modern safety systems. You just cannot separate the programmer from the mechanic anymore.
But looking at the scope of this massive service campaign, there's a glaring limitation in the recall documents.
What's that?
What the notices don't answer is how long these owners have been driving around with this latent defect, potentially damaging their transmissions every single day before the software patch was finally developed and the safety recall was officially issued.
That is the uncomfortable truth of complex engineering. The vulnerability often exists, silently compounding damage long before the manufacturer identifies the root cause and implements a solution.
Okay, we've covered a massive amount of ground here.
We really have.
From the trade agreements governing the factory floor, through the economics of the dealership lots, and right down into the fluid dynamics of a transmission valve body. Listening to all this, I am struck by a massive contradiction in the source material.
Which one?
The government is pushing these incredibly strict USMCA trade rules to force domestic manufacturing, right? But the administrative burden is so high that car makers might just pay the tariff instead. It entirely defeats the purpose.
That tension points to our first major theme. Policy shapes the product, but economics ultimately dictate the corporate response.
Right.
The automotive market is not a free-flowing natural environment. It is constrained by international rules. But when the cost of compliance exceeds the penalty of defiance, the policy just fails.
And the second contradiction is happening right on the sales floor. Automakers are pouring billions of dollars into aggressively pushing new electric vehicle lines, like the electric Silverado.
Yeah.
But the data shows consumers are overwhelmingly retreating. They're running back to traditional gas-powered vehicles like the Traverse, or they are abandoning the new lot entirely to hunt for deals in the used EV market.
Which perfectly illustrates the second theme. Affordability dictates reality.
Always.
Automakers can build all the premium electric trucks they want, but the consumer's wallet is the ultimate filter. We see this clearly supported by the massive surge in Cox Automotive's used EV data, where buyers finally found a price point they could actually stomach.
It seems like the manufacturers and the buyers are just pulling in completely opposite directions.
Mm-hmm.
Which leads me to a third theme, the sheer vulnerability of complexity.
Oh, yes.
You need an accounting degree to understand where your bumper was manufactured to comply with trade laws, and you need a computer science degree to understand why your transmission failed to hold your car in park.
The Ford and Lincoln rollaway recall perfectly supports that. The more complicated the system, whether it is a global supply chain or a powertrain control module, the more points of failure exist.
So what is the practical takeaway for you, the listener, navigating this environment?
Well, the auto market is fundamentally fractured right now.
Yeah. If you are shopping for a vehicle, you are no longer just buying a simple machine to get from point A to point B. You are buying into a highly volatile mix of international trade constraints, expiring tax credits, and incredibly complex software networks.
You really have to look closely at the used market for true value.
And you absolutely must stay vigilant about checking those recall notices, because the physical mechanics are driven by code that can and does fail.
The car sitting in your driveway is essentially a rolling ledger of international trade, tax policy, and software engineering.
That is a perfect way to put it. Thank you for tuning in to this segment of Auto News Talk. Next time you see a brand new electric truck or a used EV out on the road, ask yourself, did natural consumer demand put that specific vehicle there, or did a legislative loophole?